Hello there. My name is Cathy Madavan, and I'm part of the Spring Harvest Planning Group. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation today about the important topic of humility. And I'm talking about it with Paul Friend. Paul, it's so good to have you here. Tell us about yourself.
So I'm Paul Friend. I lead a charity called SWYM, which is West Youth Ministries, based down here in the southwest of England. Working with children and young people, camps, events, training, all sorts of things. I'm married with two teenage boys and was involved in leading a church for 15 years as well. This is a topic I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I'm so glad that you said what SWYM is. First time I heard about it, I thought you were teaching people to swim, but actually West Youth Ministries. It's just a fantastic organization. So yeah, this is a subject you're interested in though, so much so that you chose to write an entire book about the topic of humility. Paul, you could have written about anything in the universe and you chose humility. Why? Why is this so key to what you see?
I think it's something that's kind of dear to my heart in terms of just recognizing as people, but also as leaders, that it's absolutely a core component of what we need to be going after. And Jesus described himself as being gentle and humble in heart. So if we want to be following in the footsteps of Jesus, we have to pursue humility in our own lives. And I guess just recognizing in myself a deficiency in that, recognizing that I kind of bent towards pride and ego and arrogance, and just desiring more humility in my own life. But also, I guess, a challenge in leadership of recognizing that so much of leadership in the West has become about the stage and celebrity, and how do we go back to walking in the way of Jesus, which is about releasing others, about not being at the center of it all. And so I guess it was a kind of personal journey, to be honest, around really wanting to understand the topic more and to be able to pursue this life and leadership that's marked by humility. And then, if that blesses other people, then that would be great. And that's kind of why I wrote it.
I mean, I think that's so true, but I think it's true. It's true for leadership. And I know that's a really important lens to look at this through, but I think it's true in your relationships, if you're married, or just your friendships, and actually in your workplace, wherever you are, that jostling for success, power, significance, striving for status, that's the norm, isn't it? So it feels like, it's an important topic. I think sometimes people confuse I think maybe before I read your book, there's that tendency to think, oh, we're talking about low self-esteem, or we're talking about putting ourselves down. But that's not what you mean, is it?
No, not at all. I think there's a danger that we make it about self-deprecating, but actually I think there's something about trying to find a right balance, and which is actually about finding the right view of ourselves before God, that we know that we're absolutely loved and valued and called and precious to him, but that we don't think we're it, like everything revolves around us. There's a great definition of pride from the dictionary, which talks about having an exaggerated sense of one's own importance. And I think that's what we often think about in terms of pride. But I quite often talk about worm pride, which is where we basically think that we're worthless, or we're no good, or God could never use us. And actually that is still pride, because it's orientated around ourselves again. And so there's something about this pursuing of humility that's about getting a right view of ourselves before God, that we are precious and loved, but also that we're in utter dependent need of him for everything. And finding that right balance, I think, is really tough. And I think that's why the journey of trying to walk in humility is so challenging, because it's like a daily decision, and it's thought life, it's our heart, it's our actions, it's everything that we're about, is how do we choose to lower ourselves before God and before others, and having that right view of ourselves that isn't beating ourselves up and saying we're rubbish, but that is also about lifting others up.
I love that. Just a right perspective. I think, the Bible talks about sober judgment of ourselves. That sounds like the right kind of So we're not talking about false humility, but we are talking about, and in fact, you called your book Fierce Humility, which sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, doesn't it? But I think what I'm understanding from that is just a real intention about it, to kind of be much more self-aware about who we are. So if we're thinking about like being, fiercely or determinedly or intentionally humble, what does that mean to be like that before God? What does it mean to be humble before God? There was a great story in your book where your mum, when you were getting the credit for doing something in church, your mum said, just duck and give the glory to God. I loved that. So is that what it means to be humble before God? Just like not taking any credit for stuff? Is that the answer?
Well, I think it's part of the answer. I think that the challenge for me in all of that is actually learning to receive thanks in a helpful and healthy way, and that we don't just go, oh no, it was all God. It was nothing to do with me, because God has chosen to use us and to partner with us. And so there's a part of it, moment when we receive praise and thanks, that we go, thank you, thank you for that. But I think the challenge for me is when I go away from those moments and I spend some time with God on my own, that in those moments, it's where I go, thank you, God, for the privilege of being able to be involved in this. And, but this is all for you. This is for your glory. It's not for me. And I give it back to you. And that's where I guess the ducking happens in private. Whereas in the moment, it's about just saying, thank you for sharing that and for encouraging me, because we all need encouragement. It's not that we're saying, oh, you should never be encouraged. We need encouragement. As humans, we do.
But have you ever seen that? I've seen that. Have you? Like where people have said in churches, oh, we don't want to give anyone encouragement because it's going to go to their head. And we don't want people to become overinflated, but neither we want people to be living insecure lives either. Right. So again, the not insecurity, but humility. But it's okay to have strength, and it's even okay. Do you think? Is it okay even to have some, ambitious? I know you want to make such a difference in youth ministry and make a difference to churches in all kinds of ways. Is having ambition wrong then, or what would you say about that?
I think ambition, if it's about us getting status, glory, power, that's unhelpful. I think when it's a godly ambition that's about his kingdom and about his fame and his glory, that's absolutely right. But the challenge is that those worlds often start to get muddled up together. And so that's where we need to keep coming before God. And, in terms of what it looks like to humble ourselves before God, I think there's some things I talk about in the book around, we actually need to choose to spend time daily with him. That's in itself an act of humbling ourselves, an act of dependence. And what it looks like for us to live a life that is for the praise and recognition of him, not for the praise and recognition of others. And I think that's a real challenge for us in terms of our identity, our security, our worth, our value coming from God and who he says we are, not from what we do and not from what we're trying to achieve. And so a lot of that then moves into this kind of, what does it mean to be dependent on God and not to be doing stuff out of our own strength or out of our own need for affirmation or success, but just to be simply obedient to what the Father's asking of us. And I just believe that Jesus modeled that throughout the Gospels. He models this kind of dependence. He only does what he sees the Father doing. He, retreats off to spend time with him on his own at all the different moments of his life, from grief to big decisions to in the midst of busyness. He walks this life of radical dependency that is just fighting against pride in himself and in his followers. And I think when I look at the life of Jesus throughout the Gospels, I'm like, that is what it meant. Jesus was ambitious, absolutely. His kingdom, he was announcing his kingdom and defeating sin and Satan and, bringing his kingdom. But he did it all out of this place of dependence and obedience to the Father. And I think that's the challenge for me, is how do I make sure my sense of ambition isn't about me, but is all about him.
I think that's probably some of the stuff in the book that I found the most challenging is, just that whole sense of complete dependence on God, accepting that we are flawed and imperfect, which is not a hard thing to do. Like, I know I'm very flawed and imperfect, but that I'd have to pretend to be otherwise. It's not unusual to be flawed and imperfect. There's only one person who wasn't, and that's Jesus. And actually, we'd have to pretend that that's not the truth. But then that complete dependence on God, that he's in control and we're not. And I think so much of the stuff that we are doing is about it's out of fear, it's out of insecurity, and we're just trying to control our circumstances. And you talk a lot in the book about like things like forgiveness, things like just not striving and stressing, because then again, it's trying to take back first place in our life again, trying to put ourselves back on the throne that we can somehow fix the world's problems, but we can't. But we could talk about that all day. But I want to get on to some kind of really practical things as well, because you also talk, and this I thought was brilliant, about humility before other people and just how we serve, our posture, kind of doing things that maybe people might not see, but encourage developing the discipline of humble thinking in our lives. Would you give us a couple of examples of what it means to live humbly before other people?
Yeah, I think this is the bit about humility I find most challenging, because humbling myself before God, at the end of the day, he's God. And so I know I need to humble myself before him. But humbling myself before others, particularly when they frustrate me, they're annoying, or they have hurt me, that's where the rubber really hits the road on can I actually walk in the footsteps of Jesus here? And so, like, for me, I think forgiveness is a huge issue for us and for the church in the UK, in the West right now, is how do we do forgiveness and reconciliation of relationships well? And obviously forgiveness is a massive topic, and it's important to say that full restoration of relationship isn't always safe for us. But often in church, we fall out with people over theology, over just interpersonal skills. Like we just fall out with people. And the problem is that what we often do is that people don't want to work through the awkwardness, the difficulty of putting a relationship right. And so they just leave and go to another church and take the baggage of the hurt with them. And so for me personally, when, I don't have a massive list of people that I'm currently struggling to forgive. But when I do, I've got a page in my prayer journal that I go through every day, and I've got a page on forgiveness. And if there's anyone I'm struggling with, I literally will write their name and then write a prayer that's really about God blessing them and doing good to them. And I pray every day, not because I'm holy, but because I'm really not. And I'm recognizing I don't really want this, but I'm praying it until I do. And I'm going to pray it every day until when I bump into that person, where I interact with that person, I'm no longer holding any anger, resentment towards them. In fact, I'm pleased to see them. And sometimes that takes years. Sometimes it doesn't take long at all.
Yeah.
But I think that there's stuff around forgiveness. There's stuff around releasing others and not controlling, and how we release responsibility to others, not just task. Because I think often we love to control things and to be, if the buck stops with us on an event or something in work or whatever it is, we want to take control of it, and because we don't want to risk it going wrong. But Jesus just released his disciples and sent them out. He didn't chuck them in the deep end and leave them there. It was with helpful support, but he released them so well. And so how we release others, how we serve in the background and get out the way and make sure that we take on things that enable us to do stuff in secret that no one will see, to just check our hearts. There's loads of practical stuff that I think we can do to help foster this humility before others. And a big one.
I think that you're talking about like a culture there, aren't you? Like creating a bit of a culture of humility. And I know that that's true in the context of a team, like you're saying about like giving away responsibility, but I think that's just as true when you're parenting. I think it's true, like especially teenagers, as you're beginning to, you don't want to abdicate responsibility, but you do actually want to release them, whether you've got a youth group of young people, rather than just giving them all the right answers, helping them to learn to think about those answers. So I think humility is not always having to be right, not always having to have control, not always having to be holding the steering wheel for everybody. You can be next to them, making sure that they've got the support that they need to drive, but letting them hold the wheel a little bit. It's that fostering humility. But also, I just think it's even with whether you're a leader, whether you're a parent, whether you're a colleague, it's the small things too. You tell a brilliant story in there about how you used to work in hospitality, and that's made a difference to just a small choice you make when you stay in hotels. Just this little example, I think, is just about, no matter what your role in life, this is a great example of humility for me. Tell me about what you do.
I guess we have a little Airbnb caravan thing, and I'm always really blessed when somebody strips the beds and puts all of the bedding in the corner, even though they don't have to. And I was actually doing it last night, and the people who say hadn't, and so it just takes me a little bit longer. It's not a big issue. It doesn't alter my life massively, but I was blessed when people have done it. And so it made me go, actually, when I go and stay in a Premier Inn or I stay wherever, I'm going to strip the beds before I leave, even though I guess I probably paid for someone to do that. I want to bless the people who are working there and to serve them, even though I don't have to serve them. And I do it deliberately as a choice, so that it influences not just me staying in a hotel room, but it will hopefully breed something in me that chooses to serve, even when I don't feel like I need to, or I should, or I want to. I make a choice to lower myself and prefer somebody else. So yeah, that's something that
it is just guarding against that sense of entitlement, isn't it? And kind of saying the other people around me are just as much worthy of honor and value and respect as me, and I'm going to do little things that challenge my sense of importance, self-importance, by honoring. And you give some great examples of that. I'm always impressed with the people who just put out chairs at church, or who go and spend time speaking to the person who's the most tricky to chat with, or whatever. Just those little and they're an internal choice, aren't they, each day at the supermarket, to talk to the person, or to just honor people. So just very briefly, just to summarize at the end, if you had to say one thing, if we are thinking about being fiercely humble, but Fierce Humility is the book, what is the one thing that you would say? Why is it so important?
I discovered during my research an amazing prayer that I'm trying to pray every day by C.J. Mahaney, and he says this: Father, I want to stand as close to the cross as I possibly can, because it's harder for me to be arrogant when I'm there. And I think for me, that's where it has to begin. If we want to walk out a life of humility, we need to just place ourselves as close to the cross, to pursue Jesus and his life, to be transformed more and more into the likeness of Jesus. And as we pursue that, and as we pursue humbling ourselves before God, then allowing ourselves to have a short account with him about how we're doing that in our relationships with others, whether that's with our family, with our, within our church environment. What does it look like as we're pursuing Jesus and pursuing that humility before him? God, would you challenge me? Would you challenge my heart, my motives? Would you help me to see what I don't see internally that is getting in the way, so that I can really be more like Jesus in the way in which he served and led and modeled a lifestyle of humility for us?
That is so good. What a great prayer. And I just think this is such an important conversation, such a big topic, and probably something we just need to keep coming back to. So thank you so much, Paul, for helping us to think about it. Your book, Fierce Humility, is such a blessing. I really enjoyed reading it, and found it both incredibly challenging, but also incredibly practical and inspiring. So thank you for writing that. And thanks for talking to us today. And I hope you have all enjoyed this conversation too. There's loads more content like this on springharvest.com. So do check it out. But for now, thanks for joining us, and I'll see you soon.